Well, welcome. It's about doing your duty. And your duty for this assignment is to give me a summary of this particular video on deontology. So here we go. It's a Greek word. We've covered this in class. It brings two Greek words together, deon and logos. But it's about doing your duty. It's a theory based on reason and principle. Moral theories operate in the realm between the two ideas of commending and commanding. Which is stronger? I think you know. It's the commanding, and that is the categorical imperative. That is the duty. You must do it. In the very earliest of civilizations, there were people giving commands and thinking that there were commanders out there that maybe we couldn't see. Deontology is kind of based on that idea that there are some duties, but we can figure them out by reason. And this is Immanuel Kant's idea. I like the idea here, the two words here compared to each other in the sense of commanding and commending versus descriptive and prescriptive. I hope you can recognize the prescriptive like a commanding rather, and the descriptive is, it's a recommendation. It's describing. But prescriptive is definitely the command. It's a modern area. In the 1600s, Kant asserted that categorical duties, whose origins he believes is in reason, are to be followed. We are to follow the categorical imperatives. Deontology recommends, on the basis of action based on principle, it comes from reason. It's justified through an understanding of the structure of action, the nature of reason, and the operation of the will. So he's recognizing our understanding and our ability to use our consciousness to gather reason and put together a phrase, an imperative, something like, you should never lie, or murder is absolutely wrong and therefore you shouldn't do it. Those are the ideas behind reason. We can reason this out, and then the operating of the will is, doing it, performing it. And that's going to be on your quiz, but it's also important to recognize that we have the conscious ability to reason through things and then do them. This is where Immanuel Kant was working. He really argued that reason was the basis of philosophy. If you remember him, we talked about him before, about the time and space. He said that people are intuitive about that, and they get the thatness before the whatness. Well, this is the same guy. David Hume is a little bit different, a little bit earlier, but not much that they really worked at the same time. He recognized that passion or desire is what drives human behavior. He was the non-cognitivist associated with the newspaper test. Connecting and doing things driven by our emotions. That is David Hume. Kant totally disagrees with Hume. Hume drives with the passion or the will, Kant with reason or intellect. And that's where we're going with the deontology. Kant sees our actions as duties in two kind of categories. Okay, they're two separate. They're prohibitions, and you remember the other one? They are obligations. You have to do them. And then there's another one, and you can look at these with a phrase, or I want to say alliterate, alliterative phrase, but it is not an alliterative phrase at all. Can't even think of what it is because it's late at night and I'm trying to do this. But at any rate, it's POP, P-O-P, and the last one are permissions. That's the most of the things in life we're going through permission. Most actions are permissible. They're done out of self-interest, and whatever is not commanded by ethics as either prohibition or an obligation, it's free game to do, and you've got the permission. Rights, and this is important in Kant's mind, that there's a difference between having the right to vote and the right to a house. There's a difference between having rights in general and having duties that are important for you to do. A must, they're commanded or obligated to stay away from. Question is, do we have a right to a car? Yeah. Does that mean we're commanded to have a car? Or do we just have the ability to get one if we can afford it and so on, willing to pay for it? The rights and duties and types of goods are very much related. Why would we favor some over others? It's based on a deontological theory, and it's really about reason. What can we reason out? And I want to pose to you that we can reason that there is a duty to others. Here's why. The concept of having a right is others-oriented. This is in our textbook. We're focused on others when people have rights. The right to speak, it's others-oriented. The right to life, it's others-oriented. The right to choice is even others-oriented. It's oriented in the sense that it takes others to take the right away, as well as allowing you to have rights. When rights are spoken about, you're talking about other people outside yourself. Be a great discussion question. Motivation gets us to do things, and on the quiz, and Kant says that motivation comes from moral law. And there are two primary motivators that cause us to act. And they are the ideas of right and wrong. Most people think this, some people might think this is a little intuitive, intuitionism, but we'll get to the point where Kant makes it clear that this is about reason. It's not about being intuitive about much. Categorical imperative is a command that depends upon nothing else aside from the rational ground for itself. It constitutes a command of moral absolutism, coming from moral realism. Now, this is his supreme principle of morality, and is a categorical imperative. And then he has another idea of what an imperative might be. It's a hypothetical imperative. And that is, if you do this, if something happens. It's based on something else. But the categorical imperative is the supreme principle of morality. It's really the idea behind an absolute rule that all people must follow all the time. But you have to come up with them. He doesn't lay them out and say, here are the 5. He doesn't have that. He does, though, point out the difference between a categorical imperative, which applies to everybody at all time, everywhere sort of thing, an absolute rule, versus the hypothetical imperative, which may just have a time limit. It may have a situation or a particular area, but it's requires, it's hypothetical. It depends upon the antecedent, the things that follow. If P, then Q, and Q is conditional upon P, then there are conditions. It can't be changed if It can't be changed to if Q then P, the first one can be. Because if P, let's use this idea. If this rock is always, if, let's see, I wanted to say, okay, if you're, let's not use rocks, I'm going to use priests. And this, I know this isn't a religion class, but this is what I've taught for more years, and I use it in another class I teach. Not all priests are Levites in the Judaism line of religion. In Judaism, not all Levites are priests, but all priests are Levites. If P, then Q. If you're a priest, you are a Levite. But you can't say if you're a Levite, then you're a priest, because Levites are the whole group. They're a big tribe, and only a portion of those Levite people are priests. It's a smaller group. So this is about groups. We could say, if you're a woman, then you're human. But not all humans, you can't turn it around and say, if you're a human, you're a woman. No, it's a smaller group of the first one. So that's why it's hypothetical. That's why it's based on this condition. It can't be changed. You can't say all humans are women, but you can say all women are humans. The hypothetical takes some form of immediate grasping. Conditional is some sort of other thing. So that's why it's called hypothetical. It's not applicable to all people, but it's situational. But anyway, I wanted to point out the if P then Q part. And it might be good for you, and this is on the quiz, come up with a hypothetical imperative. I mean, well, you can come up with one of those too, but it's not on the quiz. The categorical imperative is on the quiz. You need to come up with a couple. Think of what a categorical imperative would be and what it might sound like. Most categorical commands require some sort of context. You can't just say categorically, get up. Well, why? Can you say, I believe you should keep all promises? Does this mean that all promises have no exceptions to break? That's what a categorical imperative is. You have to come up with an idea that is applicable to all people at all times. And here's an idea that will kind of work a little bit on your brain, maybe. Does an is statement lead to an ought? Now, we talked about this earlier. I think it's in page 8, actually, in our textbook. If there's a snake under your chair, is that going to, should you move? Should that change into me saying that there is a snake under your chair? Does that force you to move? Is that an imperative that you have to? Well, if you have a death wish, it doesn't. Now, most of us would move. Now, there's some people who might look down and want to hold it and touch it and look at it, show it to other people. And we all know who that would be. But it is right to keep promises. But just because we have an is statement, here's the question for the categorical imperatives and for this particular moral normative theory. Can ever an is statement turn into an ought statement? That's something to think about. I believe it is right to keep promises. Can that be turned into, yes, everyone must keep promises, or everyone ought to? If morality is said to accord with logic, then it is illogical. It's illogical to be immoral. In fact, Kant says to be human is to be rational. And if you're not rational, you're not human. The bottom of page 78, 178, he wants to help you understand how to create maxims of moral actions. Be like, coming up with a law. And Immanuel Kant wanted to come up with moral laws covering all people. There must be three components, he says: a particular event, characterization of a generic event, and a law that governs events of these type. Moral maxims are normative statements that tell us what to do in a given particular situation. But we're not going to cover on how to come up with these maxims, but let's just have it suffice to say this. Deontology is about following rules, or about following or doing the duties, the things that you have to do and that you're morally obligated to perform. Now, you may not be able to come up with moral maxims, as he would like to call them, but I think we all understand following the rules. Simply put, that's what it's about. Now, here's a question for us. We may have discussed it in class. If there's a society of liars, would this society be rationally coherent? Can we have a society of liars? Here's a definition rather of lying. And this is on your quiz. It's on your final as well. Definition of lying is that you freely are saying something false with the intent to deceive someone else. So the two sections of this is that you're saying something false on your own free will with the intent to deceive. That is the definition of lying in Kant's view. And in Kant's view too, and this is really actually Michael Boylan, the author of our textbook, his view of lying. But in Kant's view, intent is a big part of duty. What is it you intend to do? If either of these, he says, are missing, if your intent is you weren't intending to lie, you just said something false because you were stupid, or you didn't know better, or you were misinformed, then it's not a lie. But if you said it willingly, freely, and you knew it was a lie, and you wanted to deceive, you wanted to misguide, then it is a lie. To make a universal maximum, the general maximum can't significantly change when it's created. So there's just some more rules on that. I don't think we're going to talk much more about categorical imperatives as a maxim, but here they are. The other part of his an emphasis on categorical imperatives is on the human dignity. This is on the quiz as well. Intrinsic goods are unique, priceless, grounded in the highest power that we apprehend, and that is reason. We need to pay attention to other people and recognize them not as means, but an end. And this is the way he explains it. Act in such a way that you always treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never simply as a means, but always as an end. What Immanuel Kant was doing with this was challenging people to not use people, but to treat them with dignity, and everyone was to be seen as an end, not as a means to an end. Here's the symmetry, is that we're all equal. And you need to understand, recognize, but maybe even more important, maybe honor that other people have desires too. They have needs, and we need to recognize that we're on the same level of the people. So we have equal desires and must recognize all other human beings as agents with similar desires and with equal rights. We're all in the same playing field. We're all humans. Men, women, whatever color, whatever race, whatever culture, whatever financial status, whatever age. And that's where Kant was coming with. And then the end, he says humans are the ends as well. They're just not a means to an end. We should use politeness and consideration and dignity and show respect for all people. He felt like this is human, this was reasoned, and we should be able to see this with our intellect. The imperatives provide formal justification of action, and they are materially concrete depiction of a way a society should behave toward others and toward themselves. Principal criticism of the categorical imperative in deontology is posed with these questions. Why? Why do we have to follow the rules? Duty to what? This is too thin of a concept. You just can't follow blindly their thinking. And in the end, most see Kant as an unyielding and very rigid, because you have to follow the rules. And it's about your intent. Kant ignores family. He doesn't have this in his theory. He doesn't talk about community or the nation. He creates an empty set of rules full of sound and fury, signifying nothing, is what Boylan says. And that, my folks, Boylan didn't cite it. Kant could see only two duties of people: to create happiness in others and create our own moral perfection. Remember with Benjamin Franklin and trying in our virtue ethics, trying to perfect, patience and perfect proper labor, to perfect whatever virtues he was talking about, frugality. But the reality of it is, and Kant was looking at perfecting these things too, even though he wasn't looking at virtues. But we can see actually, what I was getting ready to say, the reality of it is people usually turn these around. We want other people to be morally perfect, and so we judge them, and we create our own happiness, not the happiness of others. It's kind of the irony of Kant's thing. While he was very rigid, he was more about creating the happiness of others. We have a tendency to want to create happiness for ourselves, and we do just the opposite of what he suggested. That is the end of this video. There's material on here for you to summarize. Be sure to turn it in. Thank you very much.